So one of my most frequently asked questions that I receive via email or via different social media platforms that I'm on is, how do I improve my art? And this is something that I receive from both artists just getting started on their journeys, as well as more advanced artists who have maybe hit some sort of plateau. I just made a little compilation of my top 10 tips that are gonna help anyone move faster in their journeys. Doesn't really matter what point you're currently at. But tip number one, and you're probably not going to be surprised that I share this first, but this is going to be to take up a sketchbook habit. Work in sketchbooks. Get used to doing smaller sketches, smaller studies, smaller explorations. These are studies that are not meant to be, finalized, super polished, or even shared with anyone else. I have talked about in the past how these smaller sketches and smaller explorations are honestly just as important for your artistic growth than more finalized pieces that you spend hours and hours on. Both of these I would consider super important, and sketchbooks are places where we can make mistakes, where we can practice things in isolation that we feel we need to improve on. And I can tell you for myself, they were huge in helping me stay consistent. I used to take my sketchbooks to work and take them out of my bag when I had a little lapse of 10 to 15 minutes to do quick sketches and stuff like that. One quick tip within this one is, if you are the kind of person that buys sketchbooks and you are intimidated when you open up that beautiful sketchbook and you feel that everything has to be perfect in your sketchbook, buy a cheaper sketchbook that you're not going to be afraid of wasting or ruining or whatever it is, and you're going to be a lot more comfortable with just using it up. Moving on to tip number 2, and this one is use references. Use photos, draw or paint from direct observation, use all sorts of references, all sorts of material that can inform your work. If you don't use references and you fall into that false belief that a lot of beginner artists out there have, that real artists work only from imagination, then you're gonna be hindering yourself, you're gonna be limiting your knowledge of art fundamentals. It's via using references and observing what things look like in real life that we develop our observational skills and that we learn about light behavior, perspective, proportions, color, all of these things that are super important to know about if we want to improve our work. These are all art fundamentals. Not to mention, remember that just because you're using a reference does not mean that you have to copy everything bit by bit. You're exercising your ability to create your own original compositions, taking what you need from your references, changing the rest, combining different references, etc. Moving on to tip number 3, and this one is to adopt a project mentality. This doesn't necessarily apply to isolated studies or explorations that you do in your sketchbook. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But what I am referring to is making sure that you are looking at any finalized piece that you're looking to spend a longer time on, or series of pieces, as a project that is composed out of different phases. What I mean is, always break things down into separate things that you can practice or look into and learn about separately that you feel is going to help you just create that larger piece or work on that series more effectively. Make sure that you're planning your composition, that you're doing thumbnails, quick thumbnails before jumping in. Always ask yourself if there's any way that you can prepare, plan, or practice different things that are going to help you move forward a lot more successfully with that finalized piece. And simultaneously, once you're done with the piece, always make sure that you're coming back to do some self-critique, some self-evaluation. Moving on to tip number 4, and this goes hand in hand with what I was just mentioning before. And this is to self-critique, self-evaluate your work. Sometimes it's going to require you finishing with your piece and coming back to it 2 weeks later, even a month later, to be able to see it with fresh eyes, because sometimes when we just finish up with a piece, we're very close to it and we need to gain a little bit of perspective. But it's always important to do that self-critiquing. I really like placing a bunch of finished pieces in front of myself to notice threads amongst them, in terms of both strengths and weaknesses, and just specific ways that I make use of color, marks, my overall technique. All of that informs your creative process so much, as well as gives you a great idea in terms of how to move forward practicing in a more mindful way. If we don't acknowledge our weaknesses, then we're gonna be stuck doing the same mistake again and again and again, and we're never gonna move forward with it. It's always super important to be honest with ourselves and just know that every single one of us has strengths and weaknesses to continue working on. Tip number 5, and this one is to share your work and don't be afraid to receive feedback, especially when it comes from someone that you respect, that is maybe a little bit further ahead in their journeys, who knows about art and knows how to give feedback. Oftentimes, like I was just mentioning before, we're too close to our work to see certain things that an outside view, an outside perspective would be able to notice. And aside from this, I feel it's just very important to share our work so that we can see what others connect to, relate to, or what sticks out to them about our work. Because many times when we're starting to work on our artist statement or starting to just really delve deeper into finding our artistic style and voice, we need to know these things, and we're able to take these valuable pieces of information and see whether people are connecting with our work in the way that we want them to connect to it, and just transmitting the message or the story that we really want to transmit. Moving on to tip number 6, and this is, of course, I was not going to leave this out. Learn about art fundamentals, at least the basics, elements and principles of art, compositional design, form, light behavior, value, color, okay? And then depending on the subject that you're into, if you're into portraits or the human anatomy, then definitely delve deeper into anatomy. But it doesn't really matter what kind of artwork you like to create, whether it's hyper-realistic or completely abstract, what kind of medium it is you're using, whether you draw, whether you paint, doesn't matter what kind of artwork you create. Art fundamentals and really developing your knowledge and your practice using these art fundamentals in a mindful way is going to take your work up to a whole nother level. Moving on to tip number 7, and this is to study other artists. I would recommend making sure that you're taking into account more contemporary artists as well as artists from before, looking into specific artistic movements. And of course, you can study them in terms of creating direct replicas of their work and really trying to research about the particular artist's creative process, why they like doing things the way that they did. Things like that can be very valuable. Of course, I would never recommend staying stuck with just copying other artists' work, which is something that I've talked about in the past. But there are other ways of learning from other artists, and it doesn't only come down to creating direct replicas of their work. By making time to sit down and observe their work, breaking it apart, like for example, using Edmund Feldman's method of critiquing, that is going to help you really be able to break down compositions apart and really take what you like about the particular artist's way of doing things and using different elements and principles of art and designing their compositions and whatnot, that you can then use to create better artwork. Make sure that when you're looking at other artists' work, you are being very specific about what it is that calls out to you, and that you're only taking the bits and pieces that you actually like and are drawn to use in your work, and mix it up with things that you're creating on your own or with things that you like from other artists. Tip number 8 is think like an artist. Use your 5 senses to get inspired to create new work or studies. As artists, we have higher sensibilities than most people. And if you're open to it, you can see interest in the most common and trivial of objects or subjects around you. You can get inspired by a feeling that pops up, or a little thing that you saw at the park when you were walking, or, a color scheme that you saw in an outfit in a magazine. Bits and pieces that you can grab from here and there in your day-to-day life. You don't necessarily only have to look for inspiration in the form of other artists' work. This is something that a lot of people just getting started get stuck with. Listen to yourself. There is a ton of stuff inside of you that you can get inspired by, and open yourself up to the possibility of getting ideas and inspiration from different things, not only visual art and paintings and drawings, but how can you apply the things that you feel, the thoughts that come up, the things that you are just appreciating with your different senses in your work. Tip number 9 is to realize and accept that sometimes quantity is more important than quality. If we don't keep moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and we're just stuck working on one single piece for a long, long time, we're never going to gain that momentum, and we're never going to create enough work to really make the progress. Like I was mentioning before, not everything that we create is meant to be a finalized masterpiece. Sometimes we're going to be working on smaller sketches or studies and leaving them with that unfinished look, and that's perfectly fine because we had a specific objective for that piece and we got it done, and it's time to move forward. This mentality of getting it done and moving forward is really going to help you break away from that perfectionism. You got it done and it's time to move forward. And finally, tip number 10 is never stop learning. So as artists, it's important to continue challenging ourselves and stepping out of our comfort zones and not stay in that comfort zone, that comfy, warm place for extended, very long periods of time. It's important to continue evolving as artists as we continue to evolve as human beings. I really love challenging myself with different mediums and subjects and techniques. And this is a way that I make sure to continue pushing myself, and at the same time, I keep things interesting for me along the way. I never get bored. I rarely run into any sort of art block because there's always something that I want to continue learning and improving upon. And so just make sure that you continue pushing yourself a bit at a time. Of course, this is not to say that you should not be doing things for fun, for just the fun of it, because I am a huge believer in making time for that as well. Thank you guys so very much for watching today. I hope you have a great rest of the day and talk to you soon. Bye guys.